Welcome to the SiriusXM Urbanview Accelerate Town Hall. Here are your hosts, Emil Wilbekin and Kelly Kinkaid.
Hello and welcome. Thank you for your attendance. Today is a special and important conversation. I'm your host, Kelly Kinkaid, and tonight's topic is supporting our brothers. The Black gay male is the most affected population with HIV and AIDS in the U.S. Cities such as Jackson, Mississippi, and Baltimore, Maryland are two cities that have been hit hardest with HIV and AIDS. ViiV Healthcare created an initiative called Accelerate. Accelerate is to address the needs and concerns of these alarming statistics and have wisely partnered with other movements to bring more awareness and increase the voices that have been attempting to spread the word, to educate and direct others to better tools for treatment, prevention, and care. I'd like to begin with introducing my co-host, Emil Wilbekin, founder and creator of the platform Native Son. Emil is widely known professionally for his contributions in multimedia, with his talent seen with companies such as Complex, ViiV, Giant, and magazines. He continues to be a trailblazer, being at the pulse with the Native Son movement. Welcome, Emil Wilbekin.
Oh, thank you, Kelly. This is so exciting to be here with you, and I thank you for asking me to participate in this, and I'm just grateful on behalf of all Black gay men that we are able to have this conversation in this space.
Absolutely. After your visit, you and Marc, Meachem's visit on First Day with Kelly Kinkaid on Sway in the Morning Show, I received a lot of responses and people wanted to hear more. Even me in my travels in the past couple of weeks, when I speak about this topic, when I give the rates of as far as the higher rates in these two cities, Jackson, Mississippi, and Baltimore, Maryland, people are giving me little tidbits like when you have the meeting with them again and do a bigger event, ask them this question. Right. So I wanted to start with Native Son. Okay. Why did you start this organization? It's a movement.
Yes.
And what is it? What is Native Son, and what have you been doing?
So Native Son is a movement, and I call it a movement and a platform because it's a movement because I'm literally moving Black gay men as a group to be more aware of themselves, to be more self-actualized, but to also speak up for themselves. So that's why platforms like this and to be here with this great group of men and this incredible woman is important because we need to have these conversations at the intersections. Native Son is inspiration and empowerment for Black gay men, and we celebrate each other, but it's how we see each other, and it's kind of helping to curate conversations like this along with ViiV Healthcare around as much as I can, and with you, so that we can talk about, this very, very big, hairy elephant in the room that no one talks about.
And it's so amazing because I find it when I look at the timeline of HIV and AIDS. When we first were made aware of HIV and AIDS, that was like 81. So it's almost 40 years. And this is a conversation we're still having. We're still trying to educate people. And for you, with Native Son, before Native Son, yes, I'm curious to know, what is your connection with this? You are openly Black gay male. Yes. And you've been in the industry for how long? Did you start? Were you open when you started in the industry?
Pretty much. I was pretty much open. I came out when I went to Columbia University to get my master's in journalism. And it's so funny because, I came out in London the summer before I moved to New York because of Isaac Julian's film, Looking for Langston. And I went to Piccadilly Circus. I actually read about it in Time Out London. And I saw this beautiful photograph of these two Black men, and they were in bed, but it was like tasteful and beautiful. And I was like, what is this? I have to go see this. Right. And I went to see it, and it was all using Langston Hughes prose and poetry, but it was set in the Harlem Renaissance, but mixed with modern day. And I was like, okay, that's me. I'm gay. I need to come out. And I came back to go to Columbia, and I had a girlfriend of mine was getting her MFA, and she was Venezuelan. And one night we were going out in a cab, and she said, "Are you gay? Because our friends know you're gay, but you don't say that you're gay." And I just burst into tears. And I was like, I didn't know it was okay for me to say that I was gay. So I think that from that moment on, I've really become an activist. I've been out at every job that I've had. I went through a long relationship with my mom about coming out because she wasn't happy about it, which I think can happen to a lot of gay people, and especially in the Black community. So I think, having these conversations is really important.
And we're talking about Black gay male and HIV and AIDS.
Yes.
What's your status?
So I'm HIV positive. I have been positive for it'll almost be 16 years now. I didn't talk about it publicly until 2 years ago when I launched Native Son. And it was important for me to come out in that space because how do you leave a movement and tell men to live their lives authentically and live their truth? And if I'm not living my truth. And so I did it. And I had not told my mother at that time. And after I announced it in front of 50 Black gay men and press, I went home that weekend and I told her, and she died like 6 months later, but I had the great pleasure of telling her that truth and not having any regrets.
Wow. Was it ever a time that you felt, I'm just going to keep it to her, I'm going to let her live her life and wait?
I kind of tried to do this rationale with myself that she was older, she was from a different generation, she had been sickly, she had congestive heart failure, it would kill her. Like, you make up all these stories. And Malcolm MJ Harris, who is out about his HIV status and came out on the Oprah tour a few years ago, I called him because he helped convince me to come out at Native Son, and not come out, but convince me, but coach me on the coming out. And I said, I did it. And he's like, did you tell your mother yet? And I was like, no, but she's kind of sick and I don't want to. And he's like, I told my grandfather in intensive care. He's like, they're your family. They will love you regardless. Tell your truth. Wow.
And I've heard good stories, like you make the coming out like bar mitzvahs.
Yeah.
Like, hey, we're going to do a party and stuff. And you would think, at this year, 2018, that it would just be open. It wouldn't be a hard tell to your family and friends, but there still is. There are people, or men, and even women that are still having a hard time. And I wanted to bring in our guest because we're co-hosting.
Yes, we are.
And because I would love for them to join this conversation. And I'll start with the first. We can go back and forth. Our first guest, we're going to start with Marc Meachem. So Marc actually was another guest on First Day with Kelly Kinkaid, and he is the head External Affairs North America for ViiV Healthcare. He's doing great work, raising a lot of money, helping and supporting for a wonderful play. I had the opportunity to see as much as I can. And I want to welcome you, Marc Meachem.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you, Marc. Yes. And, I'm so grateful to Marc because Harley and Company, who actually kind of produced as much as I can, made this introduction to the play, but also to Marc. And for me, part of my dream of Native Son was connecting Black gay men. And so to meet someone who is so powerful, but someone that really lives their life with purpose, it was very humbling to meet Marc.
Yes, thank you for coming. Our next guest is the Bishop Joseph Tolton. How are you?
I'm well, bless you.
Good, and you are you talk about your mission is globally.
Yes.
And you are in the name of your church is the Fellowship Global.
Yes.
And I really have enjoyed a lot of your sermons you've talked about, and you are openly gay, and you have a church. You started a church in Harlem.
I did.
So being in the church, in the Black community, that's a big topic because I keep on saying we're still talking about this. We still have issues, and just the Black community and the Black church. Being a minister, how difficult was that for you? Just to come out? Were you out when you started your ministry?
I was out when I started my own church. The purpose of the church was to create a safe space for people of faith, particularly African Americans coming from a Pentecostal background who wanted to have a landing space where we could worship God freely and openly.
Wow. Wow. And now what made you go globally? Because you were just in Harlem, you partnered with another minister.
Absolutely.
But what made you go outreach?
We were hearing reports about the anti-gay bill that was tabled in 2009 by the Ugandan parliament. And I heard it on Rachel Maddow, just like other people. As I began to do a little bit more research, what I realized was that it was actually American evangelicals who were sponsoring the rabid anti-gay movement, not only in Uganda, but throughout many parts of Africa. And I began to connect the dots, that those that are against health care, those that are for the heavy policing of black bodies, those that are for tax policies that don't benefit the poor in our country, those that are not for environmental justice, those that were for things like stand your ground laws, and we know the implications of that. The same group of people were not only causing harm to African Americans, but they were doing incredible harm to people all throughout Africa. And it just became clear to me that we have so much more in common that divides us, and that we've got to unite because we have a common enemy and a common threat.
In your travels and studies, what is the ratio as far as the rates with the black gay males globally?
Unfortunately, it does mirror the rates of infection that we see here in America. In some southern African countries like Botswana and South Africa, 10% of the population is HIV positive. Now, it's not just men who have sex with men. They're of the highest infection rates, but it's also women, HIV drug users, sex workers, etc. And so the same issues that we're grappling with here, they're wrestling with there. One of the great evils about the myth of homophobia in Africa is the idea that it is un-African. And so your sense of African identity and heritage is stripped from you if you are a gay person. And so that lack of identity causes people to live their lives in ways that make them very, very susceptible to HIV and AIDS, because they're living a reckless life because their identity is not grounded.
You know, our final guest is Kenyon Farrow, and he's the senior writer at thebody.com and thebodypro.com. And just like Bishop was talking about, on a daily basis, you get a chance to see a lot of research, a lot of information. Since you've started, do you feel like there's been a growth with education? And if not, why?
I think in large part, unfortunately, we haven't seen the growth in terms of education about HIV that we should have. In a lot of ways, the science has outpaced the general public's knowledge about HIV. So, you know, we're at a point now where, you know, we know that people who are HIV positive, and if they, you know, have antiretroviral treatment, or the cocktail drugs as people kind of commonly know them, that people, if they get to viral suppression and the virus is undetectable in their system, that they cannot transmit the virus, right, through any means, sexually or otherwise, right? And so I think, if you talk to the general public, when I'm in Ubers and taxis around the country and kind of explain this to people, people's heads explode. When I talk to people about the fact that we actually have a pill, right, that will prevent HIV infection, and is just as successful in doing so as condom use, right? Pre-exposure prophylaxis, or PrEP as we call it. People's heads explode. Now, I often have black folks in those situations say, well, why isn't somebody talking to black people about this, right? So I think we have a huge knowledge gap in terms of where, so part of what ends up happening too is I think that the stigma is still very much embedded in communities, largely because people don't have the right information about what we now know about the virus, and how people with HIV can remain healthy, and how we can you know, prevent, you know, new infections. So
you brought up something very interesting. So I am a real heterosexual female, you know, and I had questions about this pill. And Marc, maybe you can, and Bishop as well, speak on this. So the pill, the nickname is called PrEP. And tell us more about PrEP, because I have an interpretation, and I'm wanting to know, if we have this pill, we have condoms, we have all this medicine, we're still having the high rates of HIV and AIDS in our community. And as far as you work at a pharmaceutical company.
I want to go to Marc.
Sure. Well, I think there are really three things. I think one thing is the knowledge gap that Kenyon just mentioned, is that people just not aware, even to some extent people in healthcare outside of, who work outside of HIV aren't aware. I think another issue is the issue of stigma, which we touched on as well is so critical. So there's so many people who would actually rather wait and see. They're aware that the medicines are out there, but because they don't want to come out, because they don't want to come out about either being gay or about having HIV, they say, I'll wait till I get sick. But the unfortunate thing is when people wait till they get sick, they might have an opportunistic infection. They might wait too late. And you see this in people of color routinely with HIV, that they show up and present with more advanced disease upon diagnosis.
You know, it's so interesting. And just for your status, what is your status?
Sure, I'm HIV negative, but I have been on PrEP for 3 years.
How about you, Bishop?
I am HIV negative.
Marc?
I'm HIV negative.
Okay. And, you know, my understanding with the PrEP pill, but a lot of people are still scared to get tested.
Well, you know, it's funny. We did. We had a conversation last year with Native Son.
Yeah.
And people were like, I don't. They, you know, people they come up with the Tuskegee Airmen,
The syphilis
tests and stuff like that. And then people are like, you know, it's not tested, and I don't want to put something in my body. If I'm already healthy, why would I take medicine? So seems to be a real aversion to it. Would you guys agree?
Absolutely. In March of this year, the Centers for Disease Control released some data showing that of the roughly about, I think it was like 500,000 people who are on PrEP in the United States, only about 1% of them are black folks. So we're talking about a very, like I think the number was 7,000 the prescriptions that they can track to African Americans. So I am one of 7,000 people who has access to PrEP, who is black in the United States.
So, but you're a writer, so you're privy to a lot of information, more than your average person that has a 9-to-5 that is a black gay male. How are they getting this information? How are people knowing about this pill?
Some of what's happening around the country is sort of community-based organizations and health departments are sort of doing some level of kind of information campaigns. So, you see it here in New York City with some of the ads kind of, talking about, PrEP access or whatever. But there's still kind of a gap in terms of, I think one of the issues that people don't often see us, right? They don't. Right. So people don't see other black folks who are using PrEP, or it's not as visible. So then it seems like it's something just for white gay men, and whatever. So I kind of have in my inbox, on Facebook or other social media or whatever, have people who say, "Hey, I'm thinking about getting on PrEP. I heard you're on PrEP." Or they know the work I do, and then they ask me a bunch of questions. How do I get it? Or sometimes people have tried to get PrEP and actually have had their doctors try to dissuade them at, either, I don't specialize in HIV, and you don't have to be an HIV specialist to prescribe PrEP, or whatever other sorts of things. Oh, you don't need that, or these sort of myths that, even as Marc suggested, physicians who don't work in HIV in some cases are part of the problem, quite frankly, in terms of doing the work of actually helping people, even when they say that they want PrEP, who are, kind of maneuvering and dissuading them from doing so.
So the PrEP, you take it every day?
Take it every day, yeah, once a day.
So that's just helping you prevent HIV, but you still run the risk of getting STDs.
Absolutely. So and also one of the things that's important for people to understand is that PrEP is not just sort of taking the pill every day. I mean, that's a huge part of it. But because I'm on PrEP, I see my physician 4 times a year, right? So I do HIV tests, STD tests, etc. And so for people actually who are on PrEP, they're actually seeing the doctor more. And there's a couple studies that have come out in the last roughly year that have shown in some cases, some people on PrEP actually have fewer non-HIV STIs. Why? Because they're seeing their doctor and getting treated faster if they have them. Other folks, we in the country right now have a huge syphilis. I mean, syphilis has been rising in this country before PrEP, frankly, even got on the market in 2012. So, so a lot of people, there have STDs that aren't actually being treated. And so actually being on PrEP actually becomes a way for people to actually get access to the kind of health care that they actually probably need, as opposed to creating a situation where we're creating a bunch of STDs that people don't know about. So it actually is the opposite of what you would think.
And going to the doctor, men of all colors don't go to the doctor. And I think just adding this as far as getting tested, because it's going once a year, getting tested, and some do twice a year. Why are we scared to go to the doctor, black men?
Marc. Let's ask Marc.
Well, I can't answer that question, but I will say that that's one of the things we saw in the research we did in the Accelerate project is that the men were not going to the doctor on a regular basis, but they were getting HIV testing on a regular basis. So that's one of the places we actually see is room for a dialogue. So when somebody gets a negative diagnosis, they usually jump up out of the seat and head for the door. But that's actually a perfect point for education about PrEP, about living with HIV, because the incidence rates are so high, and about the evolution of HIV treatment as well.
Audience, how many people get tested on a regular basis?
That's good.
And the people who don't have their hands up, you know, I love to find out, is it a fear? Have you ever been tested? I mean, I'm curious because y'all didn't raise your hand.
Oh,
Let me get the mic.
Can I out myself? My status is HIV positive. So I go to the doctor several times a year as well.
Right.
So that's why I kind of already know my status. So there's no use in reinventing the wheel. But I do go see the doctor regularly, and to the gentleman's point, which is which adds to why things are caught earlier. And my experience with testing and with dealing with other doctors, when I was in the South in Atlanta, just because of the jobs I worked, it was a lot harder to get off. The hours weren't available as they were like here in New York. New York is very progressive as far as like having Saturday hours, having hours when you don't work. And for a lot of Black men, it's like, I have to work these hours. I have to work second shift, or I have to work this shift. It's hard to be able to navigate. Healthcare is about having time too, and the luxury of time to actually get treatment and seek stuff.
Yeah, I was going to say,
Thank you.
Before I found out that I was positive, I wasn't getting tested regularly. And then I got really, really sick. And I was out of work for like a month. I was like still kind of like in New York, right? So it's like, messenger me the pages, and this is like before emails and stuff, so whatever. I'm older. But they were like sending me work, and I was on the phone, and I would do it. And then finally, when I went back to work, everyone was like, you're really thin. Like, what happened? And I was like, yeah, I think I had swine flu. Like, it was really, really bad. And then a friend of mine was like, who was positive, was like, I think you need to go get tested. And I was like, no, I'm good. I bounced back. It was the swine flu. The exact same time the next year, I got sick again, because your body is like a calendar. And then he's like, okay, we're going. And he basically took me to get tested. And this is back in the day where you had to like wait. Like it wasn't like, oh, I'll be right back. It was like, okay, call us on Monday. And I'm like, what? And then, I found out. But I think in general, we have this aversion, like we're good, we're healthy, we're men, we're strong, we're going to be fine. But we do need to get, tested. And now that I'm positive, to, George's point, like I have to go in twice a year, get blood work. And I'm like much more acutely aware of my health and my body than I was before.
What do you feel when you were diagnosed and they said you're HIV positive? Did your activism turn up even more now? Like, I got to spread the word?
Yes. I mean, it did. I mean, I had to kind of process and deal with my own kind of licking my own wounds and, and really questioning, like, how did I get here? Because, I was an executive. I was doing really well at ViiV. And I just was like, you knew better. But I think that's then what led to the activism, because I was like, how can I help other people not get to this place? So I started doing a lot of HIV and AIDS activism and advocacy work. And that just kind of fueled me, but I was doing it without telling people my truth. And actually it was here at Sirius. I did an interview with ViiV when Charlie Sheen came out.
Right.
And I didn't know what we were going to talk about. And I walked into the studio, and then they hand you this folder, and she's like, okay, we're going on. And I started reading, and it's all this stuff. And I'm like, oh my God, I can't speak this from my truth. And I said, I don't ever want to be in that position again.
Right.
So this was actually a pivotal place that helped me come out.
Emil, with you and our guest, you all have created areas of safe spaces you with the play As Much As I Can, your church, your writing through your writing, and even with Native Son. And Bishop, I wanted to find out from you, one of your missions is creating safe spaces
Absolutely.
for people. Was there a safe place for you when you came out?
There was not. I was in the pulpit at about the age of 10, and I've loved God with all of my heart for all of my life and known that ministry was my destiny. But I also knew that there was something that was a real hurdle, which was myself, my own sexuality. And so I grew up with this incredible question: how will God use me if this is who I really am? And thankfully, a group of people coming out of the HIV and AIDS crisis in the Black community built a safe space for queer people of color to worship in. And I was able to come into that safe space and help to add to it. But I think it's really important that we remember that it was the HIV/AIDS crisis that gave birth to the affirming Black Christian space in America, because many of us who were dying of HIV and AIDS were rejected by the church. We built the church. We were the choir directors. We were the preachers. We cared for and dressed the first lady. And then when we became very sick, and in the 80s, you were physically showing your sickness, they refused to bury us. They refused to funeralize us. And so that safe space was created, and it has meant so very, very much to so many people since that time.
This is for all of y'all. Why are we still talking about this with all this education and tools and millions of dollars and AIDS walks and telethons? Why are we still talking about this?
Well, I think the reality is, and particularly in communities of color, is that we're not talking about it. So people are still, particularly when you look at LGBT youth of color, they're disproportionately homeless, let alone talking about HIV status. And it was one of the things we saw in the research we did down south, that people feel like there are strikes against you. So people said being a Black male in the South is a strike against you. Being a gay Black male is the second strike, and then getting HIV is the third strike. And so there's this sense of the stigma, I think, that drives it to there's things that aren't said. And that was the other thing that's really interesting that we saw a lot in the South, is that there are things that everybody knows, but you just don't talk about it out loud. You don't say it, and you don't speak it.
And the play, the partnership, Emil, between yourself and ViiV Healthcare, it was such a good play. It was very interactive. One of the things that stuck with me was, what are we going to do? Because sometimes people think, oh, it's just them. Because that affects all of us. And as a heterosexual female, we're still talking about men who haven't come out and that aren't really stating their sexual orientation and bringing it to us. Men who are getting out of prison, regular men that have jobs and are going home to their wives that are HIV. I love this play, and I just wanted to know what made you join this partnership, and just how can more people go see this? Because right now it's been in Jackson, Mississippi, Baltimore, Maryland, and New York.
Right.
This has to get out to all these other cities.
So when I went to meet with, so two sisters run Harley and Company. It's Alex and Sarah. And so they did the production. It's like super modern. It's really beautiful. Sarah did the writing based on the research from ViiV. And then they kind of sent that back out. Marc can explain it better, but they sent that out and had it kind of confirmed by the community. And they showed me a trailer in their office, and I literally broke down in tears, because I had never seen a story about Black gay men and HIV. I've never seen it. And then I've never seen it told this beautifully. And so there was something that really moved me. So they said, would you come to Baltimore to experience this immersive theater performance? And which I've never done immersive theater, right? So it's like you are part of the action. You are knocking down the fourth wall and you're in it. And for me, so it's kind of interesting because you move through different rooms with different groups. And like I said, it's this beautiful design, but it's also these triggers happen, because there were things like when, and I won't spoiler alert it because you got to experience it, but going into the clinic and finding out your results and talking to your mother or talking to your best friend. And all these things were triggering things with me. And so I left, and I was excited about the play because it's beautifully done and the cast was amazing and the storytelling is beautiful. But I was saddened in a way, because it kind of brought up things that I hadn't dealt with or just dealt with. And so I think it's powerful. And so I thought, you know, they were like, well, we'd like to partner with if it comes to New York. And I thought, absolutely, because this is, to me, what I want Native Son to be a part of, right, is having these conversations.
Right. And Marc, ViiV Healthcare has a $10 million commitment to support innovative projects that focus on improving the outcome for Black gay men. You know, and I love these action words for this. The goals and approach was listen, activate, and amplify. How has it been so far? And when did you start this particular initiative?
So we're in the 4th year of the initiative. And so far, I think it's been fantastic. And I think there have been some surprises along the way. And I think that as much as I can as an example about that. And as Emil said, it was about raising really the voices of these men and their lives and their experiences. And it's just something you don't see. And again, breaking that silence we talked about, as well as the stigma. And we had some, I think, we wondered a little bit, because it started in Baltimore and in Jackson, and the research, we ended up speaking to over 400 men between Baltimore and Jackson for the stories that bubbled up into As Much As I Can into the play. But we wondered if that would be just localized, if you will, to Baltimore and Jackson. But since we've been in New York with the play, the response has been tremendous. And the unfortunate thing is that these things trigger for people who live in New York or Chicago or LA.
Right. And have you all seen the play as well?
I haven't.
Yeah, I haven't seen the New York run I'm going next, but I saw it in Jackson last year.
Right. And how was the experience for you?
I thought, it was amazing. I thought similarly that it was the first time I had seen really, Black gay men are very visible at this moment in history in popular culture and other things, but we're sort of there, but not really. Like, we don't actually really have stories, lives, partners, family members, etc. Right? We just kind of accessorized or accessories to other folks. So to see a story that really centered what the experiences of Black gay men are in community with family and healthcare providers, etc. And even though the story is slightly different from mine, I had a great coming. I mean, my family was kind of around. My mother and my father both had LGBT friends and et cetera. So I grew up in Cleveland.
How old were you
when I came out?
Yes.
I officially came out at like 18. But everybody knew. Nobody was surprised. My cousins were all like, "Yeah, girl." Right. So, I sort of tell the story sometimes that we're talking about kind of films from the late '80s, early '90s when I was 14 and Marlon Riggs' Tongues and Tie was on the air on PBS. My mother made us sit down and watch it as a family.
That's brilliant.
Right? So I had that experience at 14. And so I was kind of like, I think she's trying to say something here. And she was. We talk about it now. So in that respect, I had a different kind of experience, but I could still relate to the stories because I'm still a Black gay man and I know what, kind of it's like for a lot of my friends who did not grow up with the kind of support that I had. And I'm from a poor, we grew up in the projects. So I don't want people sometimes think that it's just, like if you're sort of middle class or upper class, that you're not homophobic. No, I grew up in like the poorest part of Cleveland, and that was my experience.
And that to me is really important because as I was watching the play in Baltimore, it kind of dawned on me, like we live in this very privileged existence in New York, and especially, Native Son, a lot of us are like Black gay professional men, right? And so I was like, wait a second, if you're growing up in the hood, you may know a lot of other LGBTQ people, but your health and your safety and your well-being and your families can be in jeopardy based on your sexual orientation. And so when I thought about that, it kind of informed for me, like with Native Son, I was like, well, we need to then figure out how we can galvanize this community to then go into the community and really do good work and be visible.
When you speak of that, as far as the coming out and people knowing and being afraid, and as far as the judgment, Kenyon, you wrote an article recently about big data and HIV disclosure. What prompted you to write that article? Because if people haven't gotten a chance, to read it, you definitely should read it. And I felt like it fell in line with Mark Zuckerberg and the Facebook and sharing the information. But you can tell us a little bit more with this HIV disclosure, what that article was about.
Yeah, so the article was about, as, kind of the scandal with Facebook and Cambridge Analytica and these things started to kind of roll out, and there's been so much public attention on what's happening to our data when we use any of these, or even Google, right? When you Google stuff, there's tracking. So I wanted to look at what does it mean, even though we have HIPAA laws that protect, medical providers from sharing, your private health information. But what happens when you are in a Facebook group that's an HIV support group? Or what happens when you're, kind of what happens to that? So, yes, I wanted to look at, how that plays out, or even in the conversation now about net neutrality, right, that's under threat. So what happens if, internet service provider decides, well, we don't want HIV or LGBT content. So that means a site like The Body, right, which people come to looking for information and, resources, can be blocked, right? Mm-hmm. So that can create a problem when we talk about, access to information. And we, even from looking at our own kind of data, we know that about 75 to 85%, depending on the week, of people who are come to thebody.com are searching for it on their mobile phones, which tells you that there's something about they don't want other people to know that they're looking at this HIV site or trying to get information. So I think these issues about disclosure and kind of how our data is being shared or whatever are things that we need to be thinking about.
Right, and there was all that drama with Grindr.
Which was right after it. Right.
Yeah.
Right, who was actually selling
the information, people's data.
Wow, and
Keeper
of Secrets, Bishop being in the church, yes, a lot of, keeper secrets.
Yes.
I think that not only we've seen a lot of situations as far as the ministers, yes, the late Eddie
right.
Long.
That's right.
And even people come to you. I find it interesting that mental illness, yes, there's a big initiative called Thrive, yes, and they had a big weekend, and First Lady Shirlane McCray spoke about, a lot of people start at the church.
Yes.
What was your experience? Do a lot of people come to you to come out?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And they come broken and torn, and they have real stories of their struggle and of their misery. People often trying to quiet their sexuality through drugs and through alcohol. And so we call ourselves specialists as affirming pastors. We can be generalists, but we're specialists. And God has given us the specialists of working particularly with people going through that experience of coming out and reconciling their sexuality and their spirituality. And we talk about sexuality and spirituality kissing each other, and what a beautiful coming together that is.
When we talk about religion and the Old Testament and the New Testament, how do you, someone who maybe has grown up, a lot of us have grown up in the church, and they have that tug of war, well, the Old Testament says this and the New Testament says this. What do you say to those souls, those lost souls? And because I know you say it's all about love at the end of the day, but how do you kind of make it make sense for someone?
Yeah, that's the most difficult part, because particularly as conservative Christians, there is this idea that the Bible is perfect and inerrant. And we really have to reimagine our relationship with the scriptures and understand that the big W, the word, which is God, can be found in the text. And we've got to devalue the text and put the text into context and actually exalt the revelation of the Christ, the revelation of God as love that we find in the text. And that's very tricky work, but that is the work that we do on a daily basis. And it's hard for people because the scriptures have been what they've known. It's been a bedrock for them. And so it's really about reclaiming your faith and reimagining your faith.
I want to go to the audience. Is there any questions that anyone would like to ask one of the members, our guest? And say your name.
Hi, I'm Eddie Jerome Jones.
Thank you.
And I am also in the multimedia industry. I'm a personality. And I have a question for Emil, because you spoke on being out and professional. And I want to know, like, when you go into job interviews and you're making that first impression, or you're at networking events, as you can see, I am very visibly gay. I live my life authentically through, like, I express myself through fashion and makeup and whatnot. And I do know how to tone it down to go into a job interview and how to go to work on a day-to-day and an everyday face. But how do I find that balance of, like, not necessarily scaring away possible employers because I am visibly out and they may not want that vibe in the workplace? How do I still maintain my authenticity without just like...
Well, I think now, especially right now where we are in American history or world history, forget American history, world history, we are in a come as you are space. And I think people are having conversations like this and standing up and being recognized. Like, there was so much chatter recently about Megan's being described as biracial. And someone was like, who, biracial? Like, no one uses biracial anymore. Right. And it's like, she's black. But it's almost like the media was using in London biracial to make it like somewhat more accessible. So I think it's like you have to go as you are. And I'm going to give you a really great analogy. Eddie hosted a Native Son red carpet at the awards last year. And so we wanted to do a promotion on Instagram. And so he sent this. I said, I need a picture. Can you send the picture so we can create the graphics? And he sent this picture in a suit. And I was like... who's that? And I literally was like, oh my God, I didn't know you had a twin brother. And like, I didn't even like, and I was just kind of like, okay, well, who is that? And so then he was like, oh, and he sent me another one, was like a little, like maybe a t-shirt. And I was like, okay, I don't know what's going on right now. So he's then sent like a black and white checker coat outfit and like a smiley face purse or something and full makeup. And I was like, that's who you are. So I think you have to show up who you are. Now, with that, you also have to show up in your full self, and you have to be excellent, and you have to do your best work and come prepared for whatever job that you are seeking out. But I've been really, since I've been created Native Son, I've been meeting people in all the intersections of LGBTQ. And it's amazing. Like at Apple Store, I met a trans man who was hired because he was trans to help them with their employee relations as a trans person. So I think that right now, show up as you are, be prepared, do your best, and be ready, but be you.
What do you, I was just thinking about, we have the Lena Waithe era, like everything is happening for her now.
Yes.
Janelle Monáe came out and said she was pansexual. How do you think a lot of people are owning their truth, but how do we connect the disconnect with own your truth, be who you are, but be safe? What are some solutions for that?
I don't think that there is a prescription or a silver bullet. I think that in every moment, we're constantly forced to have to make a decision that we think is reasonable in that context in which we find ourselves. And every time we make a decision that we think is a good one, it just makes us more courageous and more brave and more self-confident for when we have to make that decision again.
What I find interesting on the timelines of timelines of HIV and AIDS, how it just goes up and down. We talked about it's almost 40 years of us starting to know, of us knowing what it is. I looked at, in 1987, they said it was the first national conference on HIV. Then in 1988, they did the first brochure went out to 107 million people, and it was called Understanding AIDS. Then we had the historic 1991, because I'm a basketball fan for it. So Magic Johnson in 1991 announced that he had HIV. And this is what I found interesting. So then in 1998, it was a big headline that the rising rates of HIV and AIDS has gone down. And it's like, okay, but now it's going up. And it's like this hilly roller coaster that we're going on. And it's just, why?
Well, but you have to put that in context.
Yeah.
So for white gay men, the numbers are actually going down. For black gay men, they're going up. So for people of color, men of color. Yeah. So the thing is, part of that is access to treatment and healthcare and so forth. But the numbers for black gay men specifically, they're staggering. And for me, it feels like it's also a social justice issue. Because it's like, we don't talk about young black boys and black men being shot down in the street. So why are we going to talk about them infecting HIV or AIDS?
And I would also say, too, when you look at the kind of trajectory of the epidemic, with the exception of certain cities that had health departments that really put some local resources to support black gay men's prevention work, there was really no federal money for, men of color writ large until like 1999. Right. That was the first CDC grant to do prevention for men of color. Right. And so when you think about that, we were already 20 years into the epidemic before dedicated resources, even though we knew that basically people of African descent had been disproportionately impacted. The data started to come out about that by like the late 80s. So it was still by like the late 90s before we saw any federal money. And most of that money went to support like community-based organizations, which was great. But a lot of it also was more kind of directed towards sort of behavioral interventions, right? When what we know is that the disproportionate rates of HIV for Black gay men are not because Black gay men have disproportionate behavior issues around unprotected sex or drug use or the other things that fuel the epidemic. We're talking about mostly access to healthcare, so people test late. There are issues, obviously, of stigma and homophobia, right, which also drive people away from testing or healthcare, those sorts of things. And then some of it was just, frankly, the law of averages, that by the time you get to the 2000s, I always describe it this way. So I was a Black gay man, and I went to, a Black gay club here in New York City. Even my chances of like meeting somebody who, was HIV positive and also didn't have access to healthcare before the Affordable Care Act, was probably like 1 in 2, 1 in 3, 1 in 2, right? If you went to the white gay community, it was like 1 in 10. So that's just if I have sex with somebody and it's unprotected, the chances I'm going to have sex with somebody who is HIV positive and probably not on treatment so that they're can't transmit the virus are just far greater. And so it's some of those structural issues that we have yet to really, only I think in the last few years, begin to really like try to address in real ways.
Marc, with the goals of Accelerate and the money that's being put in, what efforts are you doing to help people in Jackson, Mississippi? And I can speak on that because I was there. That's the big city. So if you go to Laurel or Meridian or these counties, how are you touching those people? How can the people in the small time cities who are black, not even people, Black gay males, get this information, get the medicine, try to understand and be involved?
Well, I think one of the things is having platforms like this, because I think if there's one message I'd want people to take away in communities of color is that it doesn't have to be that way, that the 1 in 2 lifetime chance of acquiring HIV if you're Black gay man, it does not have to be that way. We have the tools and the medicines to interrupt transmission. We have the tools to let people live a long and healthy life. I think when you're in rural areas, a lot of times what you'll see is kind of the mobility. So very often people will not want to seek care in a rural town because somebody might know your family when you go to the doctor. When you go to the pharmacy, somebody might know who you are and your name. So very often you'll have people go to the bigger cities to access care when you're in the Deep South. So I think those are some of the critical issues there. And then in terms of just the awareness is that there are resources out there, but I think that we really have to share them more and get people to talk about them more.
I think platforms just like this are important to us to continue the talk and with the play as much as I can. Has there been any success stories? Because Emil spoke about when he went, and when you went, it's like, even when I went, it was like, ding, something connected with me.
Oh, yeah. Every night. I mean, I think two of the ones that stick out is that one, when we were in Baltimore, there was somebody who worked with children, and they mentor Black children of color, and they said, I'm a straight person, and that I realized sitting through this that I would not have anything to offer an LGBT child. I want to be able to help them with those issues. And so by going through this experience, it made me say, I'm going to reach out, get some resources so I would be able to point that child in a direction. I think the other thing was a treater in Jackson who said, I see people every day and I see them for 8 minutes or 15 minutes, but I really didn't have a picture of their life. I mean, I know they have a full life outside of when they come to see me in the office, and going through this experience gave me a glimpse into that life, into their experiences.
How can people find out more information about this Accelerate?
Well, they can definitely, on our website, which is www.viivhealthcare.com. We have more information about Accelerate and the other programs we do. So we talked about women. So HIV is still a significant issue for Black women as well. And we have programs in women as well. So information all on our programs is on the website.
Bishop Tolton, in your and on your mission, what's the future for you as far as your efforts continuing in this year?
I believe that all oppression is connected, and our message in the future is, what is that core issue that connects matters of economic exploitation, homophobia, the stunning rates at which women are the victims of sexual abuse, and at its core is really patriarchy and masculinity gone off the rails, because our God view informs our worldview. The three Abrahamic traditions, Islam, Judaism, Christianity, we need a new enlightenment where we fully embrace the totality of who God is as male and female. And when we change our God view and understand that God is both masculine and feminine, it will change our worldview, and it will give us greater compassion, greater sensitivity. And when we see masculine men, masculine women celebrating their masculinity, it will not be an offense. When we see men who are feminine celebrating their femininity, it will not be an offense to us, because we will have fully embraced the masculinity and the femininity that exist to some degree in all of us. And that's the enlightenment that we need.
Amen. I've been wanting to say amen for a minute. Yes.
I say amen on the mic.
Yes, amen.
Right.
And with the Fellowship Global, how can people reach you and get in contact with you?
Thefellowshipglobal.org is the best way to reach me, or Tolton at thefellowshipglobal.com.
And Kenyon, you're at thebody.com, and you have also served on some other committees. What do we have in store? Because you're writing, you're really telling a great story, painting a picture. What's on the future horizon for you?
Great. So I'm hoping in the next year my first solo collection of essays will be out, called Black in a Rainbow World, which I'm really excited about. Second thing is, at The Body, we are in full kind of website redesign mode, which hopefully will launch at the end of this year. And we'll be launching a youth-specific site, which will can have kind of young people as contributors who will be, producing content, writing stories, videos, podcasts, etc., which I'm really excited about. So people can find us at thebody.com, and you can also find me at Twitter at Kenyon Farrow, my name.
Okay, and Emil, it's been great co-hosting with you.
Oh, I love this.
I'm waiting for your answer as far as Native Son. What is in store? Because you do a marvelous gala every year that I'm coming this year with or without an invite. I'm coming. I'm crashing.
This happens all the time. The ladies want to crash, but we need our safe space. Go ahead. Finish your question.
The Native Son.
Oh, man. Native Son is this beautiful blessing that just keeps growing, and we're doing more things. We have a lot going on in Pride Month this year, which is really exciting, because to be able to have a seat at the table as a Black gay man, that's one of my challenges has been in the LGBTQ activism space, is that, I've sat on many boards and sitting there and hearing them talk about people of color in third person as if I'm not a person of color was very disheartening, and how we're helping them. So for us to have our own voice and to raise up, so we are doing, there's a website coming, there are workshops around self-actualization coming. And so just building and doing conversations like this in safe spaces so that we can break the silence.
Yes, I want to thank you all for coming. I want to thank Marc Meachem, Bishop Joseph Tolton, Kenyon Martin, and my co-host Emil Wilbekin, because this conversation does not stop here, but I look forward to the day when we're having more conversations about positivity. Yes. That we're not worried about the rates going up, they're going down. I'm really looking forward to us coming back and having all these success stories. Amen. And I want to thank you one time for your time. And my audience, this is Kelly Kinkaid, and we're going to sign off. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for joining us for the SiriusXM Urban View Accelerate Town Hall with Emil Wilbekin and Kelly Kinkaid.